Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Trail Accessibility Assessment and Inclusive Information Training. We're really glad to have the folks from Access Recreation with us, along with Patrick Stark from the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, given an agency perspective. And just a little bit of housekeeping. We are set up in meeting format instead of webinar format today, so that we can have some kind of live real-time Q&A during discussion points throughout the presentation. But there are a lot of people registered for today's webinar, so it will be very helpful if folks can keep themselves on mute when our presenters are presenting. And then when we do have a Q&A time, or when our panelists invite discussion, if folks can locate in your Zoom toolbar, there should be a reactions menu item, and under reactions, you can choose the raise hand option when we're having discussion and Q&A. If anyone wants to just try that out now, what it looks like, I promise not to call on you right now while you're just trying out that raise hand button. And if you're having trouble with the raise hand, you can also just turn your video on and physically raise your hand, and I'll try to keep an eye out for that. Or we'll also invite people to put questions or reactions in the chat if that is more your style or easier for you to access. And so yeah, please do feel free to put questions in the chat at any time, but we will have some specific points where we pause and invite discussion, as well as plan on having some time for question and answers at the end. We are recording today's meeting, and we will make this recording available on the Oregon Trails Coalition blog. If you miss any of it today or want to return to something, you will be able to come back to that. And I think those were my housekeeping notes. Do any of our panelists want to add anything to that while we're setting the tone?
I'll just add, we do have about a 10-minute stretch break built in about halfway through. So if anyone was curious if there'll be a break, because 2 hours is a long time to hold your attention. So we'll do that about partway through.
Thank you for that reminder as well, Patrick. So yeah, we're so pleased to have these partners to offer this training today. So I will just turn over the microphone and the screen to the folks at Access Recreation and to Patrick.
Georgina, did you want to just say hi first before I start sharing slides?
Oh, sure. I'm Georgina Moran, and the founder of Access Recreation.
And I'm Sharon Mitchell, and I am one of the team of Access Recreation.
Oh, Debbie, why don't you come off mute and say
Hi, I'm Debbie Timmons, and I'm also one of the team members for Access Recreation.
And I am Pat Stark with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I work here in the Portland metro area supporting our 4 national wildlife refuges, and have been a very happy partner with Access Recreation for a number of years now. So I'm going to kind of just help moderate. I'll be running the slides today, and we'll get started with just looking at the agenda for the next couple of hours, and then largely turn it over to Georgina, Sharon, and Debbie to share with you all kinds of great information today. So I'm gonna hit the screen share, hopefully pick the right window. Okay, so thank you all for your time joining us today. We always enjoy the opportunity to spread the word, and as Sharon puts it, grow the army of those who are supporting this kind of work and getting this information out into the community. So we've got a pretty good agenda for a couple hours together today. I'm gonna Did some introductions here. Then we're going to learn about Access Recreation's origin story, have a little discussion break. Another section will be on engaging people living with disabilities, what we sometimes refer to as disability etiquette. We'll have a short video that'll play during that section. Another little discussion break. Then we'll take a stretch break at about the 1 hour mark. And then we're going to come back and learn all about the guidelines that were created by Access Recreation to help improve the information that's available for people living with disabilities. I'll have a final discussion break, and then we will have some time at the end for open Q&A. So just some learning objectives so you can kind of know what to expect out of today's session. So together we are hoping you will walk away understanding the community defined needs associated with this training, how to engage appropriately with people living with disabilities, and clearly understand the main principles of Access Recreation's trail guidelines, and understand that the guideline principles do not need to be applied all at once. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Georgina to tell you all about Access Recreation and how it got started.
Cool, thanks. Next slide. So this is me before MS. I was very active in the outdoors. I was an outrigger canoe racer. I built that, helped build that little launch down in the bottom right corner. Hiking, a self-employed cabinet maker for 20 odd years. Next slide. And this is me after I got diagnosed with MS, and I never lost my spirit of adventure. Still go scuba diving, hiking. I've even got a boat that I could drive with my chin, since I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down now. So again, my level of adventure may not be everybody's, but this was the start of Access Recreation. Next slide. So I live really close to the Columbia River Gorge, and I'd hiked there before, but now as a chair user, I didn't know what place I could go to, like how far I might be able to get up to, an ideal destination. So I went on the web, to see if I could find the information I needed. There was nothing for a wheelchair user. No pictures, no anything that would describe the trail. So then I went to the agencies themselves, and they couldn't answer the question. So then I left for the Gorge with some friends and 3 possible places that I might be able to try that they recommended. So this is Joaquina Falls Trail. And prior to that, I went to 2 others. One, I couldn't get out of my ramp because there was no parking. The other, I was able to park in the one accessible parking space and go up the trail about, 100 yards. And then I hit an obstacle that I couldn't get over, so I had to back out because the trail was so narrow, and have somebody be like an air traffic controller in front of me, to lead me back to my van. So at Joaquina Falls, I was able to go from this, beautiful paved view of the waterfall, see a little bridge up there, and start on the natural surface. And this was the first obstacle. There's a big dent right at the bottom of the rock, and I had to propel myself up the slope a little bit to get around it. But I did it. And there was a couple other obstacles like loose sand that brought me down to my axles, but my friends pushed me out. And the good news is I was able to get up to the waterfall, that bridge that I saw way down below, and feel the waterfall, feel the spray, you know, have an incredible view, you know, just the experience I was looking for. So when I came off, you know, out of the gorge, I contacted an architect with the Forest Service who uses a manual wheelchair. And I said, you know, Chuck, are there other places that are similar that I might be able to use? And he said, yes, but I'm not going to give them to you. Because if I were to say that something might be usable and you got hurt, we would be liable. So I then said, well, you know, how about meeting with us and others to figure out how to do it? And he said, yes. Next slide. So, so what prevents agencies? You know, the liability concerns, like Chuck was saying, no precedent. There isn't any place that really displays what's out there, what is necessary for people with a broad range of disabilities to know about. Next slide. So Access Recreation is a group of accessibility specialists from federal, state, and local parks, and also specialists that support people with disabilities. And after many months, meeting once a month, the good news is we figured out how to do it. You know, the key was not to use the word usable, not to use the word accessible, you know, but to tell people, you know, what is there so they can decide for themselves. Next slide. So these are the park agencies that were represented. And yeah, it was a vast group. Not everybody could come, but you know, some of the folks that did come later were like some of our biggest advocates. And next slide. Okay. Patrick, you're on.
Thanks, Georgina, for that background. A real community, a lot of community energy to help pull that group together, and also a lot of great leadership from you. So appreciate that. So this is our first little pause here to explore a concept that often comes up in discussion, but we've learned not everyone might necessarily be familiar with. And that term is temporarily able-bodied. And if you haven't heard this term before, I'll give you a little clue that it sort of fits in here into the discussion about who are we talking about when we're talking about serving people living with disabilities. So this would be an opportunity. We welcome a few folks if you wanted to come off mute and share what you feel might be the answer to this question. Do that, or feel free to add it to the chat if that works out better for you.
And this is a great time if you'd like to speak up or ask a question about this discussion question audibly, raise your hand, and we'll go to Kristen first.
Hi there. So my understanding from my research into accessibility work is that most people at some point in their life will encounter some kind of disability or change in what they are able to do. So temporarily able-bodied just means at this point in time, you're able-bodied in whatever way that means, but most people will encounter some kind of disability.
Thank you, Kristen. That was an excellent take on this question. Just to build on that a little bit, what do folks feel like might be one of these temporary situations?
Go to Samara.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind for me is when you have an injury, right? Like you're able-bodied, you're able to ski, and then you've twisted your ankle or your knee and you lose the season. What am I going to do this season? So, well, it's a temporary, I think it just reminds us how temporary and relative able means. It depends on the situation for your body as well as the experience that you're working towards.
Thank you, Samara.
And Sam.
Thanks. Yeah, the other thing that came to mind is if we're lucky enough to live long enough that our health and mobility starts to decline. I guess if that's temporary in the long range, but that's the other direction all of us are heading. Like I said, if you're lucky enough.
Thank you, Sam. Georgina, Debbie, Sharon, did you want to share any more perspective on this question?
Well, I could say that, all of those are correct. You're also talking about trauma and emotional, aspects, that might be difficult for you to engage in some level. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was sometimes it's not you, but it's your companion that wants to go out hiking with you or do some kind of recreational activity, who may have a some type of limitation. So again, it expands to just about everybody. A lot of people know somebody that they're close to.
Yeah, it's like at one time or another, we all are potentially going to have to go through something. I heard, an accident. Absolutely. Yesterday, I fell down some stairs. My ankle is hurting right now. So I am no longer temporarily able-bodied. I have a condition right now where if I were to go out on a trail, I would need to utilize some of the information that Access Recreation has put together just so that I could limit, my abilities to go on a trail. Another thing, like Georgina said, is there are certain things that may not seem to be someone living with a disability that we're going to talk about a little later on. And then, like Sam pointed out, I think it was Sam who said, if we're all fortunate enough, we will become elders. And we will have to, maybe use a cane or maybe use a walker. So I agree that almost all of us, if not all of us, are temporarily able-bodied until something happens, life happens, and we're no longer temporarily able-bodied.
Thanks, and I appreciate too what you were saying about it's not even ourselves. Yeah, I think you said that, Georgina. And so imagine too that we're all here talking about this, thinking about other people in our lives that may be affected by this. So this is all good information to have, whether it's really directly sort of you're the one accessing the information for yourself, or whether you're accessing the information for somebody else or wanting them to have access to this information. So, okay, I am going to move us along then, and I think we're going to move now into talking about engaging with people living with disabilities and what we, like I said earlier, kind of call our disability etiquette section. And that's what we'll take a look at now. We're going to start this off with a video. And we'll give it a second to load here. And if I did everything right, you all should hear the audio from this, not through my microphone, but just straight through Zoom into your speakers. So we'll give that a go here.
Good morning, Bob.
And wouldn't you know it, I goofed it up because I can't put it on mute. Apparently when I'm playing the video.
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there, big man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward. Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention!
Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What? Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind.
May I help you?
Does not mean I'm deaf.
No, I think he said he was gonna come. Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath. Relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alice.
Morning.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
Okay. So, you know, I appreciate the take on this conversation in that video. And I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment here and bring us all back together. And there's a really simple idea embedded in all that, I think, which is that people living with disabilities, it's that first word in there, people. And there's a concept called people first language or people first approach. And Debbie, I was wondering, you've done a lot to help me understand that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about people first.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I'm going to read why it's important to use people first language. Person first language is widely thought of as being very important to use in order to maintain an environment of dignity, respect, and hope. Using person first language is also a more accurate way of speaking about people. Placing the person first and the disability second helps eliminate stereotypes that can form. So an example is to say people with disabilities versus saying someone is handicapped or disabled. Saying that someone has a cognitive disability or diagnosis versus saying he's mentally retarded. And she uses a wheelchair or mobility device versus saying she's confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound are examples of how you can put the person first and their disability second. And you can go to Google and just put in people first language, and there is so many examples of how you would use this. So I encourage you to go ahead and Google it. I tried to find a web address to give you, but a lot of the examples are not on the web. So like I said, if you could just Google it, that would be the best way to see other examples, and there's lots of them. Any questions about people first language? Have you used it before? Or have you been corrected by someone because you didn't use it?
And y'all are welcome to throw a thought in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand for that. Georgina and Sharon, I feel like in discussions that we've had before, that since we're kind of a outdoorsy group here, you know, maybe are there examples you could share that are very apt to, you know, because the video wasn't specifically about being outdoors with people with disabilities, but maybe experiences that you've had or things you've witnessed in
Yeah. Well, you know, there's been a couple of things, you know, people leaning on my chair, you know, again, you know, kind of like what they referred to in the video, you know, doing something without permission, you know, is one thing that bothers me, you know, kicking me from behind accidentally, you know, or hitting me with your grocery cart and not apologizing, because it really does jostle me. It's almost, you know, I mean, just think of my chair as an extension of my body. So yeah, that's something. Yeah, and I really like the idea of this video, you know, and maybe doing, you know, some disability awareness training. So, you know, with a panelist of experts with a variety, you know, of conditions, you know, might be good. You know, again, it just will enhance the equity in your organization.
I can say as someone who travels with Georgina, you know, whether it's on a trail or it's getting on a plane and going from one state to another, or, going to a restaurant or a hotel or whatever. I see a lot of things that were depicted in the video. One of the things that I notice is that, people tend to just look at Georgina using this mobility device, and they don't see Georgina, they see the disability. And because they see the disability, they tend to defer to me as if Georgina is not capable of answering questions or giving directions or being the person that she is. And most of the time, when we're out on a trail or we're doing things that have to do with access recreation, while I am knowledgeable, the expert is actually Georgina, because she's gone through all of the training when it comes to assessing a trail and that sort of thing. So I noticed that. I also noticed that when people are seeing both of us, they tend to talk to me and not to Georgina. And as someone who is with someone who is living with a disability, what I've learned to do to counter that, to educate and not be rude, is while someone is looking at me and saying, well, what does she think about blah, 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 I turn my head toward Georgina so that they can't get my attention. They have to go to Georgina, and, it's taken me a while to learn how to do that. And if that doesn't work, and that's subtle, if that doesn't work, then the next step for me is to say, well, Georgina would be able to explain that a lot better than I could, and keep my attention on Georgina. When people are standing above, just like in the video, it's like that person who is sitting in a mobility device really doesn't exist. And so I've learned those little techniques. One thing too, when Debbie was talking about language, something else that's really important is to update how you describe someone who is living with a particular disability. For example, we don't use the word handicapped anymore. That is antiquated. It does not fit. It's better to say someone who is living with a disability. I know that's more syllables, but that is more correct. As far as someone being mentally retarded, retarded is another one of those words. Take that out of your vocabulary because it's offensive. It's very offensive. Instead, use something like, someone who has some cognitive challenges or something like that. Once again, more syllables, but it is more respectful. Like Debbie said, it's all about dignity. It's all about respecting a person for being the person and not what they are living with. So those are just a few of my thoughts.
You stirred something up for me. A way of being respectful for somebody that uses a wheelchair is to pull up a chair if we're going to have a long discussion, so I don't have to crane my neck up. So, yeah.
Because that takes a toll, and it, you would think, well, am I doing the right thing? Bottom line is we're all on a learning curve. And we're going to make mistakes. But the most important thing is at least to make that effort, and like the video said, people first, I'm a person first, and it's harder when you don't have that kind of experience in your wheelhouse. I've had the opportunity to learn from Georgina for almost 20 years. And I can't tell you how many times I've stuck my foot in my mouth. But the bottom line is I learn because I want to learn, because I want to be able to be respectful, because I want to be respected. So it goes back to that golden rule: treat people like you would want to be treated yourself.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Sharon. I was going to interject that myself about mistakes are going to get made, so I think the point of like this training and discussions like this are definitely, there are steps we can take to prepare ourselves, to think ahead, be more thoughtful, and also accept that mistakes are going to happen. And I'll just share, I had one recently that I was involved with. We were hosting an event at one of the National Wildlife Refuges that was going to involve some like speeches at the front of the room at a podium. And so we had an area set up to be the, road seating for everybody else. And I realized far too late that we had not set up a dedicated space for someone who would be using a mobility device. And it wasn't until somebody came in and had a companion in a wheelchair that we realized the oversight. And so it was a mistake. It was an oversight. It was, I was fortunate in that, one decision was like, well, there's room at the back of the room. And that felt really inappropriate. That felt, it felt like it exacerbated the thoughtlessness, the oversight. So I was fortunate that we did have a space up front that no one had sat in yet. And we were able to put this person in a position where they could actually then see what was going on. But then beyond that, it was an opportunity afterwards. You all might do things like this too. After you have an activity, you do after a review or something like that. And we did that. And it was an opportunity to say, hey, this needs to become a regular part of how we do things, because, so now we've seen how it can go awry. And so my little piece of it is don't dwell on mistakes, try to prevent them. But when you make them, learn from them, and then do better next time.
There's also a question in the chat I wanted to call out about appropriateness or inappropriateness of expressing feelings of sympathy to someone with a disability.
Well, I'll say that, and I've said this about Georgina since the day that I met her. Looks are very deceiving. This is the most able-bodied person that I've ever met. She will go places that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. She's an adventurer, and so it's really important to keep that in mind. I have absolutely no sympathy for Georgina. There is no place for that. As a matter of fact, I think there are times that she should have sympathy for me. I do. And she does. But bottom line is that's disrespectful as well, and it actually comes from feeling like if I were in that situation, how would I be feeling? So you're putting that through your own filters, and you're kind of second guessing, well, if I was using a mobility device, this is how I would feel. And if I would feel like this, I would want someone to feel sorry for me, or maybe that's what's expected. And it's not. You have to take people for the individuals that they are. We're all different, but we're all going to put, our own little spin on things because we have no other way to do that. Everything is going to go through your filters, what you would do if you were in that situation. And that's the kind of thing that we have to put to the side, and just, jump in with both feet and realize that this is a person. This is not a disability.
The other thing, if I could add, is I also don't ask the person what their disability is, because my background is as a recreation therapist. And the way I look at it is what happened to that person isn't really a concern of mine, because I am now working with the person that they are today. And if a person wants to disclose what their disability is, that's fine. But I don't outright ask somebody. Georgina, what's your feelings about that?
Yeah, I agree. If I feel comfortable, I might disclose. If it's appropriate for a situation like this meeting, I chose to disclose. So yeah, I would say just lead. Let the person lead and get to know that person. I think, I try not to take it personally when people make mistakes, or they extend sympathy. I know it's coming from the heart, so that's no big deal to me, but to others it might be. But yeah, I don't feel bad about being a person with a disability. It's a part of my experience, and I've found a way to work around it. Feel proud, not sorry. Yeah.
You saw some of those photos of Georgina. I mean, she scuba dives, with the help of friends. She's underwater, I mean, she goes on trails and backs up and down trails that I look at and go, are we sure we want to go that way? Georgina finds very, very ingenious ways, creative ways to do everything that she wants to do. Like I said, she's an adventurer and she doesn't let anything stop her.
The other thing is,
oh, go ahead, Debbie.
Not to make assumptions about what a person can do, and that's why the work AccessTrails has done is so important, because it gives people choices to make up their own decisions. But I've been with Georgina on trails where the representative from the agency will say, well, we're not going to go this way today because it's going to be too steep for you. And Georgina says, well, let's go over there and take a look. And she's able to do it. But somebody made an assumption based on her chair and not knowing her abilities. So let people make their own choices. The other thing I wanted to say was I have a big background in inclusion and assisting people with disabilities to go into regular activities. And oftentimes the instructors are very hesitant to work with somebody who's disabled. And I believe the reason is because they're nervous that they're going to make a mistake. They're like, I've never worked with a person with a disability. I don't want to do it wrong. I don't want to look silly. I don't want to get in trouble if I do it wrong. And I would just say, working with somebody with a disability, talking with someone, etc., is just like talking with anyone else. So I understand that there can be a hesitancy because it might be your first time, but please just talk, work with the person, whatever, just like there anyone else that you engage with in the public or your life.
I was going to add just, one more thought. And Dan, I appreciate that you had put this question. And sounds like you're a motivated individual with a great heart. And, I'm not here to tell anyone how to feel, but I think we're suggesting alternate ways of sort of viewing the situation. And I just wanted to throw out one more way you could kind of look at this. And I think about it from a sort of a justice or injustice standpoint. So rather than maybe a person to feel sympathy towards, and Sharon, you've given great reasons to not necessarily dwell on that emotion, but to, we're all here today. I think we're all passionate about access to nature, and that, one thing we can do from here today is be looking for injustice. So see people living with disabilities and see what they're, and really hopefully from today, you are training your brain to see what their experience is like, and you can be looking for what I would call an injustice and maybe focus on that and say, how can I make this a more just situation, and turn your feelings into action, which is, I think today, being here today, period, is a great first step in taking those feelings and turning them into action. That's certainly been the case for me. Okay, I'm going to put up one more slide here. This has been great discussion. Again, Dan, thanks for throwing that question in the chat. Let me get back to just sharing my screen again. We're going to have one more discussion break, and then we're going to take a stretch break. And so let me go to our next, oops, nope, we did that. There we go. Same deal here. If you want to raise your hand, if you would prefer to put something in the chat, but the question here for all of you is, are all disabilities visible? And I realize now it's a closed-ended question with a yes or no answer, but if you would care to elaborate on your answer, that would be appreciated. So raise your hand, put it in the chat. Are all disabilities visible?
And once again, feel free to raise your hand if you would like to speak, or if you're not sure how to raise your hand, you can give a wave or just unmute. Stephanie.
And I know this is kind of a trick question, but are all disabilities visible? No, they are not. There are mental health disabilities, there's sensory processing disorders, there's all kinds of things that people are going through that you would not be able to know or understand without, unless they share that with you.
Yeah, I noticed we've got some good action in the chat here, and Alan noted that they recently learned that diabetes can be a disability. So another one of those you might not know is going on.
I also feel like visual ability is like a large spectrum that's not just blind. Like one of my frequent hiking companions is my sister, who just doesn't have a lot of depth perception or like as much peripheral vision. So kind of trail surface and everything can make a huge difference for what she's comfortable with based on what, but no one would know. She doesn't give any other cues for visual disability. So
what do folks think is, so why do you think we're asking this question? Why do you think it's important to acknowledge that not all disabilities are visible? So basically, what are we supposed to do with this? What do you think? Yeah, Alan in the chat is bringing it back to that idea of people first, and we don't know. So and it looks like we got a couple of hands up, Steph. Oh, Steph, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was thinking we could go to Alyssa, and then if Dan wanted to speak after that.
I was just going to say that we should never assume what someone can or can't do, or what someone's going through, or what their experience is based on appearance or anything really, without talking to that person first.
And Dan, did you want to unmute and speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I kind of had the same answer, is that you never assume anything with people. Appearances can be deceiving, and everybody has a story, and you don't know that person's story. So to assume something is seems to be a default with most people, and it's just not the way to do it. Because
yeah, I think that's another one of those. My experience has been it's a very human thing to sort of lead with your worldview, your biases, your assumptions, and it takes some very conscious thought to not go there, to not go to your place of assumption, because assumptions aren't based on nothing; they're based on our personal experiences, and so it is an active effort to sort of overcome that, pause, be mindful, and realize that assumptions aren't the place to go, especially as y'all have put it, you don't know what somebody's story is.
The beautiful thing is once you open that door to, taking that risk of making mistakes and taking that risk of just meeting someone as they are, just one person to another person, it really does create more of a space for you to walk through that, and it's life-changing. It really is. When you take the opportunity to meet someone just person to person, that opens up a door. When you take workshops and whatnot and educate yourselves, when we educate ourselves, those things really click. And then you can look at all of the people that are in your life, some who may be using mobility devices, some people who may be living with PTSD, and you really start to become more consciously aware. And when you become more consciously aware, you become an advocate, and that's the key. It's like Patrick was saying, look at it more as justice and injustice and taking action to make things better for everyone. Because we are all, if we are not living with a disability, we are all temporarily able-bodied, so it just gives us more opportunities to get to know each other.
So, oh, go ahead, Georgina.
Yeah, if again, you're trying to be more inclusive, and broad thinking, of course, you can do different things, like disperse, spaces where somebody could sit, at their own desirable space if they're using a chair, but also, always include that, if you need reasonable accommodations, because everybody has got something different, so if it's an event, just make sure that that's put in there.
And even people who might visibly look like they're experiencing the same disability might be living through that very differently from each other. So also probably avoid the mistake of assuming that the same needs are there for even people who look like they're having the same experience. Well, this was kind of a sneaky segue into the next section, but before we do that, we'll take a 10-minute break here. But what's coming up now is why we want to focus next on providing good information is, I think, an answer to that question of why is it important to acknowledge that not all disabilities are visible and not all of them are experienced the same way. I think this is why Access Recreation ended up creating the guidelines that we're going to go through in the next section, because that becomes kind of the common denominator. Since you don't know, it's not always appropriate to ask, and everyone has a lot of different experiences. That's where information becomes so key. Not making decisions for people, empowering them to make their own decisions for what works for them. So that's what's coming up. So I have 12:56, and so we're going to take a 10-minute break, Steph.
Yep, that sounds great. So we'll plan to restart at 1:06. Does that work?
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
And I think we're back at 1:06. So hopefully most folks have been able to rejoin us, and I'll hand it back to y'all.
Great. Thanks, Steph. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to go into talking about the Access Recreation Trail guidelines. Sharon and Georgina and Debbie are going to walk you through key aspects of the guidelines. And I'm going to just sit and watch. And if anyone's got things that come up for you while they're talking and you want to throw it in the chat, I can also keep an eye on the chat and try and answer any questions that I can that might come up in the course of the conversation. So feel free to do that. Other than that, Georgina and Sharon, why don't you get us started?
Okay. I'm Sharon. And first of all, we want to remind you that that first hour was just kind of a precursor, and it kind of gave you a flavor as to why it's important to have some information out there, to include some basic information for folks so that they can choose for themselves whether or not an outdoor experience is going to meet their needs.
On all trails.
On all trails.
Not just the accessible or not just the natural.
Absolutely. Next slide. So Access Recreation came together, and over a 2-year period, I believe it was 2 years, different representatives who were part of the Access Recreation ad hoc committee worked to come up with this web-based live document, guidelines for providing trail information to people with disabilities. We did this by conducting our own focus groups, asking folks who are living with disabilities what is the most important information that would help you make that determination for yourself whether or not an outdoor experience was going to meet your particular needs. Next slide. So this document includes what we consider the primary and the secondary information that would really help someone make that determination for themselves. But let me say, this document is just chock full of all kinds of useful information. If you look at the very top of that first screen that you're looking at, you see that the contents include examples, a glossary, resources, all kinds of information that would help you to really get a handle of what would really be helpful and what resources are out there for you if you have any questions. So the primary information that we came up with, 7 different recommendations that would cost literally nothing for agencies to include in their websites. That would include things like contact information. And when we're talking about contact information, we're not talking about a phone number that leads to a recording. We're talking about a phone number that leads to a person. And this is important in case there's an emergency, in case there is information that would be useful before someone goes out on a particular trail. Location. When it comes to location, it's important if there is a physical address to include that physical address, because folks use public transportation sometimes in order to get to a park or a trail. Also, symbols when it comes to what is actually ADA accessible and what is not. And one thing that you probably have heard from Georgina is that we don't use words like accessible or usable. unless they are ADA accessible, such as bathrooms or parking spaces, that sort of thing. Because the idea is we just want to put the information out there and for the person to make that determination for themselves. That way you take out the liability factor that agencies are so concerned about. You know, when Georgina was talking about the fact that Chuck Freyer with the Forest Service wasn't going to give her a lot of information or tell her what trails might, you know, work for her because of that liability factor. Next slide. We also came up with some secondary recommendations, and these are recommendations that if agencies were to put these in place, you would incur some cost. That would include site photos. And when we're talking about site photos, you know, Debbie's going to go more into depth about that in just a couple minutes. But when we're talking about site photos, we're not just talking about the pretty pictures. We're talking about pictures that show, photos that show what may be an obstacle. For example, when Georgina went to the Joaquina Falls Trail and you saw that rock that was kind of obscuring her ability to get around and go up onto the trail. So we're talking about those kinds of photos because it gives someone an idea of what that experience is going to be like. Distance is another really important thing. Distance has to do with, you know, what we would do is we would create a loop when we actually profiled 36 different trails over a 3-year period. And it helps a person who is using a mobility device or someone who is using a walker or someone who is with some elderly family members, a better idea of how far that experience is going to take them. Is it going to be a mile-long loop? Is it going to be 2.5 miles? This is really basic information that folks can use ahead of time so that they can be prepared for that experience. Next slide. So after we came out with these guidelines, we brought all of our partners together. We had a big rollout and we outlined what we felt were the most important things to include on websites so someone would know ahead of time what the experience was going to be like. And everybody was really excited about it. We had people taking copious notes and they were all saying, wow, this is so simple. Why didn't we think about this before? All we have to do is describe what is offered out there. All we have to do is describe what the experience is going to be. Show some photos, this sort of thing, easy. And so we thought, great, our work is done. That's what Access Recreation was going to do originally, just come out with these guidelines. And then we were just going to turn it over to the agencies to take the ball and run with it. So we waited and we heard back from some of the agencies that there were roadblocks. And some of those blocks included, well, you know, we can only use certain things. You know, our IT guys can, they have parameters as far as how they can structure a website, that sort of thing. So we had a conversation and we said, well, you know, maybe we need to create something visual, you know, for these agencies so that they can get a better idea of what we're talking about. So we said, well, if we had unlimited resources, why don't we just do one particular trail, make it a visual so that we would have something to show. So we did one mock web page for one trail. And it kind of snowballed because we had some opportunities. We had a couple of grants that came through Metro. And so one mock web page became the AccessTrails project. Next slide. We actually profiled 36 different trails and parks in the region, in the metro area, in the metro region. And so this is the home page for the AccessTrails project. Next slide. go back one more, go back. There it is. So these are the 36 trails that we profiled. And the neat thing about this map is that it is interactive. You can either click on the trail that has to the left, or you can click on the map and it'll take you to one of the trails that we profiled. Next page. If you were to go and click on just one of the trails, it would take you to an individual web page. This one is for Smith and Beatty Wetlands Natural Area. And as you can see, this is the way that we outlined our web page for each one of the trails. We have a photo tour by topic. We have something called Trail Facts at a Glance, a description of the experience itself. If we did a video, and we did do 18 videos, if we did a video for a particular park or trail, that video is also on the page. And then we created our own map. And this map would include, as you can see, things that, or amenities that were actually or are actually accessible, ADA accessible. And so this is the kind of thing that we wanted to profile for the different parks and trails that we actually profiled. And if you look up at the top, Trail Facts at a Glance, next slide. This is the most important information that we feel. If you could do nothing other than this, providing this information would give people enough information ahead of time so that they could start making decisions for themselves. And that would include the name of the park or trail, the park agency that is the steward of that, a contact phone number, as we said, which is really important, the location. And the neat thing about the location is, like I said, a lot of people use public transportation, so we actually include the bus number or what max train to take in order to reach the park or the trail. The hours, very important. And like I said, public transportation, there you see bus service is seasonal and limited, but we give that information, the length of the trail and how difficult it is. And we know that rating is something that is really subjective, and that's something that you would want to come up with your own parameters for. But we came up with our own idea of what was easy, what was moderate, and what was a difficult trail. And then the last time that you visited that particular park or trail. Next slide. And as I said before, there's a photo tour of the trail or the park that we profiled, and it comes in 6 different categories: the overview, amenities and features, signage and wayfinding, location and arrival, trail characteristics, operations and maintenance. The overview gives you, as the word says, an overall idea of what you're going to encounter. So we have photos that would include all of the different aspects of what you would enjoy if you went out on this particular trail. As far as the other 5 categories, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie. Debbie?
Okay. Patrick, if you could go to the next page. So I'm the photographer along with Sharon on trails that we have done work on. And so one of the things as a photographer is you can only have so many pictures on a web page usually. So I tried my best to get a lot of information into each picture. So if you look on the right, there's the map. This is at Cook Park on the Tualatin River. There's a map of the river for people kayaking, canoeing. That's the sidewalk, so you can see that cement. You can see that there's a parking lot. So instead of just focusing on like the map alone, it's more of a visual picture of what somebody will find there. And then on the left is at Cook Park, it's a little bit from the main road. So I took a picture showing a sign that points down to the park so people would know to look for that sign as an indicator. Patrick? So amenities and features. If you look on the left, like I just said, I tried to encompass as much as I could into one picture. So you've got the bench, the garbage can. You can see that this is a covered seating area, which is good for rain or sun for the shade. Back in the back of the picture, some informational signs. You can see that it's a cement area, a cement trail. And then this is a flower garden. You can see that there are flowers there. And as far as features go, on the right, I joke that I've probably taken more bathroom shots than anyone else, but it's important to take bathroom. Somebody have a stroke on one side, may not be able to use that railing on the left. So even though the restroom's accessible, would they be able to use it if they have paralysis on one side? So this would be a photo that would let the person know if maybe they needed someone to assist them in the restroom or not. Okay. Trail characteristics. So on the right, if you didn't really think about it, you would think, oh, okay, this is doable by somebody with a mobility device. But if you really look closer, there's a lip on that between the boards and the soft surface. And so somebody with a walker might be able to raise the front wheels and go over it, but somebody else in a manual chair might not be able to. So showing that characteristic may or may not be what allows somebody to use that trail, but at least they know that that's something that they will run into. And on the left, this is still at Cook Park with the Tualatin River showing in the picture. It lets the person know that this is a natural trail surface, even though earlier we saw pictures of hard surface trail. This lets them know that there are two different types of trails and that this one has a slope on it going down. Well, the trail actually veers to the right, but it lets the person know. Well, let me back up, please. Somebody who has a vision impairment, each picture has a description with it. So if somebody's vision impaired and can't see the picture on screen, each picture has a descriptor that can be read to them with a reading machine that most people have. So I did want to mention that, but the picture to the left, like I said, is soft surface, and you can see that there's a little bit of a slope to it, and that can make some people nervous. Okay. So signage and wayfinding, how far is the trail? And that's really important to for somebody that's got a power chair, because they have a battery on their chair and that chair may only, that battery may only have enough power to go a specific distance. And so having markers that show the distance on the trail is important. But this lets a person who's looking at the information page know that they will be able to have markers there to tell them. And like I said previously, try to get as much as you can in a picture. So we've got a creek behind, we've got a bench to sit on. You can tell that it's a hard surface asphalt trail, and it's also got mileage. So that one picture tells a whole lot. And then on the right, we also take pictures of signs that tell the rules and signs that also tell the hours. And that's important information for people to know. And then on the right side of the picture is an informational sign. So all good information for people to know, and they would know this through looking at the pictures you take. Georgina, can you explain the TAI, please?
Yeah, trail access information is something that Beneficial Designs put out, and they are little strips that could be at a trailhead. You can put them on a 4x4 post, and it will give information on the upcoming trail, like the maximum grade, the average grade, maximum cross slope, average cross slope, the average tread width and the minimum tread width, and what kind of surface is it, and are there any obstacles or obstructions over 2 inches.
Hey, Patrick. Operations and maintenance. What's the hours of operation for your park? I'm sure that, excuse me, people have that information on a sign. Go ahead and take a picture of it. And off to the right, still at Cook Park, they were having an issue with tree roots breaking up the sidewalk or the path. And so this lets people know that they may run into some maintenance obstacles when they're on the trail. The one thing that is difficult for us to do is to keep up on what the maintenance issues are. So this picture was taken years ago, and we don't have the capability of keeping up to date and switching out pictures. So this is more of a informational, just saying you could run into work that's being done. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, like Debbie was saying, we designed actually our entire website, including photos, with the use of a reader. And so, you know, you look at the picture of the map on the right, and somebody who's blind and using a reader wouldn't be able to locate all those trails on the map, but we did it in alphabetical order down the left-hand side. Next slide. And yeah, we also did this, I don't know, 1 to 2 mile trail loop if it's available, and put the icons there. If they are ADA accessible, as Sharon said, they would be that recognizable blue accessibility color and a circle. And if it was unknown or they absolutely weren't accessible or ADA accessible, they would be the dark square. And this is for somebody that is colorblind, so that they wouldn't have to differentiate between just color. They could also differentiate according to shape. Next slide. Okay, Patrick.
Yeah, so thank you for Georgina, Sharon, and Debbie walking us through those guidelines that you put together. And so we're kind of through the core information. And at this point, just wanted to, we'll have a Q&A at the end, but what we were curious about is, based on what you've heard so far, is this inspiring either or calling to mind things that you with your organization have already done, or maybe it's inspired a thought about something that you could do that you hadn't thought of before? So just kind of a check-in here to see what's landing with you relative to your organization, your work that you're doing. And then I'll share in a little bit about what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been doing with this information.
Let's go to Kristen.
Hi. So we're actually working on an accessibility project in the Gorge, collecting all of this kind of information that someone may need. We're focusing on businesses, and then hopefully we'll do outdoor spaces as well. And this was just really great because we actually did use the Access Recreation website as part of our inspiration to kind of learn what are the things that are important that we should be including. And we have learned from you guys that pictures are great. You know, I'm always taking pictures in bathrooms now, which I find very funny, but it's so helpful. But one thing that was pointed out just now was taking pictures of signage that's around. And I hadn't even thought of that. So that's like another thing to keep on my radar. I'm always like looking out for things that like may or may not be important for someone to know ahead of time or to see ahead of time.
Thanks, Kristen. Had anyone else considered posting bathroom photos alongside your beautiful waterfalls and other landscape shots? Or are you considering it now? Let's go to Bobby.
Yes, I had a question about the photographs or something. I thought about when Debbie was talking about how you kind of select the things to take pictures of. Of course, on the trail, if there's obstacles, that might be fairly obvious, but I'm curious if the guidelines kind of have guidelines on important things to make sure to get photographs of, especially considering the various types of people's abilities, you know, because what might be an obstacle for someone with a mobility issue might not with someone with a hearing disability. And just, are there some good guidance to think about in that selection of photographs to include?
Well, I'll speak to that. I think the surface type is critical. Is it soft surface, natural surface, gravel, blacktop? Very important based on the needs of the person. I think also benches. Do you have benches? Where are those located? Do you have places that people can get out of the sun? We get lots of feedback about, you know, we want to know where the benches are. Is there a drinking fountain? Is there a bathroom? Just some basic personal need issues that people have.
Yeah, and if you were to do a trail map, show where those amenities are, you know, where the benches are. We do that on our map, and we don't necessarily say that any of them are accessible, because that's a variable. But again, you know, people can get a lot of information from a picture and a description saying whether there's a companion seat or something like that. And to add on also what Debbie was saying, sometimes going through a deciduous forest, there's like a strobe light effect that can happen with somebody with low vision. And so again, it's kind of good to describe that and any surrounding noises that might startle somebody.
And also, Bobby, there are examples in the guidelines of what you might want to take a photo of. One that comes immediately to mind is a low-hanging branch. There is actually, it's used as one of the examples in the guidelines, as far as you might not think of that as being an obstacle. You know, it wouldn't necessarily be an obstacle for someone who is seated in either a manual chair or a mobility device, but for someone who has low vision or who is blind, that is an obstacle that, you know, they could run right into. So when you go into the guidelines, there are examples, you know, as far as what you might want to take photographs of.
We also learn by doing. The more people we talk to, especially people that were blind or people with cognitive disabilities, the more photos we added as we were learning along the way. So another reason to be really inclusive with you know, your community, you know, of all abilities, you know, in this process of expanding your knowledge and your websites.
And just going back one more time to that lip that Debbie showed you in that one photograph, that lip was like maybe 3/4 of an inch or something like that. And as Debbie said, someone with a walker may be able to just lift the walker over that, but someone who's using a manual chair or a power chair, that could be, it may not be a deal breaker, but if they don't know that something like that is there, they can hit that at a certain amount of speed and it can throw them out of their chair, which is why those kinds of things, we don't think about them, but they're really important.
Yeah, I wanted to share an example that came up when we were out doing a site visit not too long ago. And the topic of bathrooms seems to be of great interest to people. There was a question from Tara in here that I tried to provide a response to, and I'll come back to it in a second. But, you know, we talked earlier about providing information that can be relevant to the person living with a disability as well as their companion. And we were at a park that had a portable restroom, and then they built a kind of a screen around it. And Sharon, you were pointing out to me that you know, what people might want to know who would be in a situation where they have a companion who needs to help them use the restroom is that oftentimes what you encounter are these out in the open bathroom situations where then, and if they're not of the size to accommodate a mobility device, that leaves the person very exposed because they have the door wide open in order for the companion to be able to help with that activity. And it creates all kinds of awkwardness at the, putting it mildly. And so we noticed that there was a screen around that created additional space. And that was a really good thing to then take a photo of and make people aware of, is that is the situation. Or if that's not the situation, people are going to want to see a photo of that to understand that, yeah, if you are and a companion both need to fit, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, and we've also been to some parks where the bathroom itself is accessible, but there's a platform that doesn't have a ramp. So it really isn't accessible because you have the accessible bathroom, but if you're someone who is using a mobility device, a power chair or a manual chair, a scooter, you can't get into the accessible bathroom, you know. So that's why I believe that, I can't remember which park or trail it was, but we actually took a photo of the fact that it was an accessible bathroom, but you would have to bring a 2-foot ramp in order to get into that accessible bathroom. And that goes back to the idea of letting someone decide for themselves whether or not it's an experience that's going to work for them. We didn't say to that trail manager that was with us, you know, this isn't accessible and you should do this, this, and this. That's not what Access Recreation is all about. It's just about the information. So if there's a photo that shows that, for example, Georgina, you have a 2-foot ramp.
Yeah.
So we would know if we wanted to use that accessible bathroom, we need to bring that 2-foot ramp with us. So
there's been some great activity in the chat, and I don't want to lose that. We have a little bit left in the presentation. So Steph, I'm wondering if you can help me keep track. You know, Dan put a great comment in here. Tara's got some great questions and comments. If you can help us track that, I'm going to finish up just our last few slides here and just share with you quickly what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and what our partnership with Access Recreation has produced as a way of just, you know, kind of speaking agency to agency. I know a lot of you on this call look like you work for either maybe a nonprofit or another government agency. I can certainly empathize with those who work with government agencies of trying to do new and different things and how that can be challenging. So I just wanted to share with you what our experience has been at the Fish and Wildlife Service and why this has been really important work for us, and hopefully to inspire all of you to kind of take up the mantle here. So let's, just really quickly for some context, I'm part of the Portland, Vancouver Urban Refuge Program that focuses on what we call our critical elements of community engagement, being community focused, intentional, inclusive, and collaborative. We have a lot of programs that we do. And one thing we've really noticed, this, you know, this idea of working with people living with disabilities, I put the word intersectional in here because no matter what other way that different communities might identify around race or ethnicity or socioeconomics, people experiencing living with disabilities cuts across pretty much every other type of community. And so this is a great thing to focus on because you can be in service to the communities that you serve without a doubt by focusing on providing this accessible information. So that's been, you know, kind of how this all got started. So we've been working with Access Recreation for many years. You saw that we were part of, the refuges were part of the original AccessTrails project. And so we're still profiled there, our places, and we continue to update that information. But then a few years ago, we kind of got into a more formal relationship with Access Recreation, and that's led to some really great things that we've been able to do together. So we've definitely been doing trail reviews at refuges together, and making sure that that information is staying up to date. We have been working with Access Rec on our own websites. And so we are in the process of doing what the guidelines are asking to create that comprehensive information. And if anyone wants to have a conversation or just have a empathetic ear to listen to maybe the challenges that you face with your websites, I'm having my own experience with that. So everything that Sharon and Georgina talked about of what have been the barriers are ones that, I'll just be honest, we're still working through. Trail facts at a glance, piece of cake. The creating a good user experience for all of the other information like maps and photos. You know, a agency like ours that has over 500 national wildlife refuges for which we maintain websites, that's, you know how this goes. They build a system that's meant to kind of work for everyone, and in doing so, it kind of works for no one. Or it's very difficult for it to work for a particular purpose like this. And so, so we're still working through that. But the one little bit I want to say about that is that the good news is, if you can solve it for one place, then you can solve it for all your places. So I said we have 560 plus refuges. Each one has a website. Each one's trying to share information like this. If we can put in the effort to solve it once, then we can solve it for all 560 plus refuges. So that's what we're in the process of right now. We've also been trying to, Sharon, I'll evoke you again. You didn't get a chance to work it in today, so I'll do it on your behalf, but grow the Army. So Access Rec has been doing this work for years now, and one of their goals beyond just getting more information out there is to get more folks like us on this call today being the ambassadors of this and going and telling others that we work with about this. And one way we've approached that at Fish and Wildlife Service is through our youth employment programs. And so you see in the photo here on the upper left is Ty Leonard, and Ty was with us for a year in our intern program and was mentored by Access Rec. And we've had other youth employees over the last couple of years that received the very training you're doing today. And wherever they end up going, they are taking this knowledge and perspective with them. So for any of you who have early career development programs or youth employment programs, having those young folks exposed to this training is really helpful long-term, because they're going to take that new perspective. We've gotten great feedback that this has been very eye-opening for folks, things they've never thought of before. And they said, I'm going to take this with me wherever I go next in my career. And then we're working with Access Rec to get facility and trail design input. So that's been an area of expertise we very much appreciated. I know it's in the chat to get back to during the Q&A of, can this help you design new things? Absolutely. We're working on new trails. We're working on new facilities. And this has been instrumental for that. And then beyond infrastructure, we've also been using this lens to look at activities we do. And often is the case that organizations will create an activity that works for everyone who's able-bodied, and then if they think about people who experience disabilities, they might create a separate activity. The idea here is to modify your activities so they work for everyone, and we've had a few examples of doing that together. So what has this meant to us? This has increased our ability to fulfill our mission, to be community focused, to be intentional, inclusive, and collaborative by putting this lens on our work. We've gained a whole new understanding of the needs of the communities that we're serving. This has been a pathway for us to be a greater benefit than just, it's not just about coming to the refuges and experiencing them. This is about, for us, it's been an understanding of other ways we can be an asset to the communities we serve by helping, like, for instance, support getting this information out there. And it's nothing short of a whole new way of doing business for us. So, so it's been real inspirational. So that was it for my piece. I don't know where we're at. Oh, we got about 12 minutes left. Go ahead, Sharon.
That if you want to follow, the Access Recreation projects, you can go to accessrecreation.org, which you see there on your screen. If you want to view the 36 trails and the 18 videos that we put together, you can go to accesstrails.org. And Patrick, if you'll advance the slide. If you want more information or you have questions, you can contact Georgina at accessrecreation.org. Back to you, Patrick.
Well, that is the end of our prepared material. So that leaves us a few minutes here to do some Q&A. I know there's been some things put in the chat. And then, of course, if you want to raise your hand, you can ask your question that way. So, Steph, why don't you set us up?
Well, let's see. I didn't do a great job of deciding where to start in advance. Let's start with this question about maintaining information that was mentioned. That's often not something that a group like Access Recreation has capacity to do for assessments that they've had. I'm wondering if on the agency, as Patrick, as your agency works to kind of implement this, if part of that implementation plan includes kind of how you maintain the information over time. If you've developed any wisdom on that subject, or if the guidelines include any information about keeping info up to date.
I think that definitely, you know, the big push is to get it pulled together the first time. And then, you know, one thing that I don't recall, so stop me if this did get mentioned, is that I think in the information that you gather, focus on things that are, what I'll say, are evergreen. So you don't have to necessarily go out and photograph every single instance of a situation someone might encounter. You might grab an example of it, and then really what you're saying to folks is, these are the kind of things you may encounter. So whether that change in the surface type, or that lip that's going to be going from gravel to concrete, whether that occurs 50 feet into the trail or 2 miles into the trail, isn't necessarily the relevant information. The relevant information is that at some point you're going to encounter that. Whether it happens 1 time or 6 times, probably not as relevant. And so that's what I kind of mean by evergreen, is like, think of providing information that won't probably change a lot. Debbie, I'm thinking about that, and if you have any advice on this, but like that Cook Park photo you mentioned was, you know, showing a temporary issue that they were having. And I seem to recall us having a conversation about this once, where it's like, you know, if it's something that's going to be like a disruption for a day or two, you might not even, I mean, you might be communicating that in some other way. Like, I know on our websites, on the homepage, if there's ever some sort of like health and safety hazard, and even if it's only going to last for a day, like sometimes we have a trail flood out in the springtime when the water's high. And so that goes up on like a little emergency bulletin section. We don't go and re-edit all of our access information to include that if it's only going to be temporary. But if it's going to be there that way for a while, we had a big restoration project that lasted 2 years. Well, we put information about that in the context of, because it was going to be with us for a while.
Maybe next we could go to the question of kind of what about actually redesigning present trails. So, you know, you do this accessibility assessment, and Sharon, I know you mentioned that, you know, access recreation isn't necessarily always asking for changes. You're just documenting conditions so folks can make their own decision. But I know sometimes as folks are doing these assessments, they're probably going to be learning a lot about barriers they maybe didn't recognize before. And sometimes I imagine those barriers are really easy problems to solve or inexpensive problems to solve, and sometimes not. So what kind of guidance do you offer, or resources do you recommend for folks who are interested in addressing those barriers or designing new trails for more inclusiveness?
Well, first of all, let me say that when we go out on the individual trails with the park representative or the trail manager, we do point out those things. And like you said, a lot of them are really easy fixes. More times than I can count, we've been out somewhere, and for example, we talked about that little lip. And the trail manager will say, well, that's an easy fix. All we have to do is create like a natural berm or a natural grade in order for that not to be an issue. So that's something that happens all the time, you know. And you know, once you participate in, you know, a training like this, and I know that everybody's going to go out and actually go on the trail itself in order to get a feel for what this first part has been. I mean, you start seeing these things all of a sudden, and a lot of them are easy fixes. Some are not. For example, if you have tree roots that are across a trail, you know, that's not an easy fix necessarily. And I can tell you that Debbie and I have taken so many photos of tree roots across the trail to show that that can be a barrier, you know. Georgina, you want to add anything else?
Well, yeah, you know, I guess, you know, like Patrick was suggesting, you know, there's certain things that are forever there, you know, like the benches, you know, but to know certain things from the guidelines that are important, like shade and sun with a bench, you know, that's kind of a basic that could be extremely helpful. And, you know, a description, you know, that might talk about the sounds that are available, you know. Patricia is blind. She's one of our colleagues. And she, you know, when she goes out hiking, the sound of the gravel when she's walking is, you know, somewhat annoying. She would prefer not, you know, she would prefer that it be natural surface. But again, you know, it's good to know what kind of surface so people can, you know from their own experience, you know, what will suit them.
We have a couple minutes left, so also welcome folks to put up a question, but I was wondering, Debbie, if you could talk about a little bit about what happens during the on-site assessment day. Some folks will be joining us up at Little Zigzag Falls Trailhead on Thursday, and we have, well, last I looked several minutes ago, anyway, we had a couple spots left on that on-site assessment, but for folks who might also be interested in scheduling an on-site follow-up training with AccessTrails, can you talk a little bit about what the group will do on Thursday?
Sure, I can do that. Patrick and I will be meeting the group up at Little Zigzag and introduce and find out what type of work people do. Then that day I'm going to be bringing a measure. It's a wheel that goes along. And the reason we're going to do that is somebody will notebook. And as we're going along and there's something that we want to note, it could be a place where maybe there's a route, for example, that will be logged as to how far down the trail that is. So we'll go down the trail, we'll look for I say the things that prove, the things that are excellent, so people can kind of get a feel for, I call it the good and the bad. And then we'll walk and I'll have a level so we can see what the slope is on a trail that we have a question about. We'll also have a measuring tape to measure how wide a trail is to see if it's within specifications of what it should be. A lot of walking and talking, pointing out things. And then at the end, we'll gather up. I believe we're all meeting for lunch at a location. And we'll just sit down and go over what we've learned, answer questions. People find that the getting out on the trail is extremely useful. And oftentimes, you know, I'll point out something and a representative will say, well, I can have that taken care of tomorrow. We'll just bring in a little bit of gravel and backfill this space and it'll be good to go. So very valuable time together.
And I just want to point out too that, you know, agency websites are really important places, but I know that people find information about trails on all kinds of online sources. So our tourism partners, Oregon, both Travel Oregon with the Oregon Trails Fund and the Mount Hood Columbia River Gorge tourism organization who are also supporting this specific training, because that's where, you know, some folks find information is on those visitor websites and as well as on blogs. And, you know, you might be maintaining, if you don't work for an agency, you might be maintaining another online resource that might be coming up in people's Google searches about a location as well. And I have talked to some folks who've done the full access recreation training before, and have said, you know, that doing these assessments on other trails in their communities also has just been a really fun activity. So the training is fun, but also it can be a kind of a fun way to experience a trail, to do these assessments on other trails as well. Well, we're right at 2 o'clock. Was there any final question that our speakers wanted to address that you saw, or final words from our presenters?
You know, I would say that seeing the work we do on our webpage, different categories, pictures within the categories, even if you're starting out and you can't do that, even taking 10 photos and having them put with your facts at a glance can make a huge difference for people. So even starting small like that would change the world for so many people. So you don't have to go big like we showed you. You can definitely start small and increase from there. So that's what I would encourage you to do.
Any final thoughts from Patrick or Sharon or Georgina?
I see a hand up.
Yeah, I think this has been really, really helpful to see your be able to expand out so greatly. And yeah, I want to double down with what you said, Steph, that it's not just the agencies. Like when I Google something, you know, it's like, you know, whatever is out there comes up to the top. You know, we just did a couple trainings with Trail Keepers of Oregon, and they do that Oregon Hiker's Guide, and they want to make all their trails, update all their trails with the guidelines in mind. So.
And I'll just add that, you know, once you start opening yourself up to this kind of information, all of a sudden you see, I may be going beyond, but you start seeing the world in a different way. You know, now I go just about anywhere, not just a trail or a park, but I can go to a restaurant and all of a sudden I'm going, where is the accessible entrance here? Where, you know, so it opens your eyes. And once you open your eyes to this kind of information, you know, it impacts absolutely everything. You know, you can look around your own home and you can go, okay, I've got stairs leading off of a deck. Now, how could I make that easier for someone who is using a mobility device? You know, is there a way around it? You know, is there something that I can do? You know, I have siblings who, when they're looking for a new apartment or something like that, they're not only thinking of themselves and how great this would be, you know, this great apartment for me or this great townhouse. They're thinking about, well, can Georgina get into that apartment? Can Georgina get into that townhouse? You know, it just opens up so much. And I would also add, again, don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're gonna make mistakes and it's okay, because we're all on this learning curve and we all are just trying to help each other enjoy everything that is out there for all of us. This is universal information. This information benefits everyone. And we live in such a great part of the country, you know, that it's great to get out there and enjoy the great outdoors, everyone. So I just want to say thank you for giving us the time in order to, you know, present this information to you. And I look forward to hearing how your experience is with with Debbie out there on the trail. Thank you.
Well, I want to let folks who need to go because I know we're after time. I do know we still have a hand raised, and so if our presenters are available for another moment, I would love to invite Dan to ask his question, but also know we're past time. So
yeah, sorry. I just wanted to thank you all for putting this out there, because this is something up here in Sisters that is a concern with some of our trails. And I know that we have done, we've made the overlook, what we call the overlook, accessible, but all this information where we can do better and do signage and get some other things in there for information is just going to be so helpful. And when I go out there to look at the trails and think about this, just kind of put it out there now. So now I got all this information I could take to the CEO of our organization to say, look, this is something we really need to think about. And because it a lot of times goes to the wayside when you're up here in the outskirts. So thank you all. That was great.
Thank you, Dan.
So Dan and everybody, feel free to contact me. Like if you're talking about signage, that just brought up all kinds of thoughts that I've heard from other people. So if you want some of those thoughts, I can put them in bullet points and send it back to you. So
that sounds great. Thank you.
I encourage people to go to the map of the trails that we've reviewed and open up a few of them and look at the pictures and read the descriptions. It'll really give you a good idea of how to do it. And as far as signs go, you might go into several of the sites and look at signage and see some of the signs that other agencies have done. Might be helpful in regards to future signage for you.
Yeah, that would be good too. I guess it would it be more appropriate to make the signage based on what you've done, just to make it universal, or?
Well, we haven't really done. We have links in the guidelines to signage information and in the resources. But, we haven't put in, we learned along the way. And so the guidelines, may be lacking some of what we learned about signage, like interpretive displays. Patricia, said, as a blind person, I would like just a line or two in Braille so I can know the gist of what this says. Not the whole thing, just a line, and maybe some raised mapping or raised pictorial or something like that. But that's stuff that's not in the guidelines, again, that I can help you with.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
It's been my experience, Dan, that, depending on who you're with, but most organizations that manage these lands are going to have their own design standards. Fish and Wildlife Service has design guidelines that we have to follow from a aesthetic standpoint that's sort of on brand for National Wildlife Refuges. So the idea of creating universal designs is difficult because of that. That's why I've found that the guidelines are so helpful to just change the type of information that we provide rather than try to convince us to wholesale change how we design things. And so just to get to the point where, I'm actually a graphic designer for our agency too. So I spend a lot of time thinking about visual presentation, and we can make the mistake of creating like a sign forest where every time we have more information to share, we put up another sign. And then the more of those signs that you put together in the same spot, then the less inclined people are to read any of them. So my advice is how do I integrate this really helpful information into something that I would otherwise already be creating? So just use it to influence the information you're providing rather than completely change how you're designing things.
I would also add too, don't think that you have to do everything all at once, because if you try to do everything all at once, sometimes it can feel too overwhelming and it can stop the movement forward. So just, start out with small little things that you can change, little things that are not that difficult to incorporate. That way it also builds your confidence so that you're not stopped by the enormity of what may or may not need to be changed.
That's very good, really good. Thank you again, everybody. Wow.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day. And if you're interested in scheduling a follow-up on-site training, Georgina's email address is in the chat, or also through the Trails Coalition. We'd be happy to try to support connecting you as well. And I'll be sending a follow-up email when the recording is available. So you'll have my email address as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.